Baby boomers don't matter anymore. Oh, thank God. We've been stressed about everything about the baby boomers since they burst upon the scene in the early 60s. And now, half of them have finally entered retirement, and we can start talking about what's next. Of course, they're the baby boomers, and it's all got to be about them. So they are rolling a couple grenades into the room on their way out. Number one, capital. Half of the boomers have already retired. That means half of them have already liquidated their life savings and gone from stocks and bonds into relatively low velocity investments like T-bills and cash. The velocity of capital has slowed. The cost of capital has roughly tripled in the last 5 years. It will triple again in the next few years as the rest of them liquidate their savings upon retirement. This isn't the Fed. This isn't Trump. This isn't Biden. This is not the business cycle. This is the boomers saying goodbye in that special way they have. Second, labor. Half of the boomers have already retired. They're our single largest concentration of skilled labor. The inflation we've been experiencing in the last few years, I'm not suggesting there aren't a lot of things in play, there are a lot of things in play, but the single biggest piece is labor inflation. And that will last until such time as another large generation fills their shoes. And that won't be for quite some time. So if you're going to ignore everything else that I say, remember this: hire and borrow, hire and borrow, hire and borrow. Because the boomers aren't done leaving yet. And capital and labor costs are going to go up sharply from here for years, and in some cases, decades. This is the best macroeconomic environment for expansion we're going to have in quite some time. More on that in a minute. Next generation down, Gen X, this is me. I'm part of what was until very recently the smallest generation in American history. And if there's a single defining trait for my generation, it's just that we absolutely loathe the boomers. We have a lot of reasons for that. All of them are backed by statistics. But let's focus on the one that's most appropriate for this conversation, and that's family. When the boomers were released upon the world in the 60s, there were so many of them that they competed with one another for labor, or for remuneration, and so they pushed down the cost of labor. And it got so bad that they did two things that no generation before had done. Number one, they became mobile. This reputation that Americans have for jumping around, that's mostly the boomers looking for better job opportunities, where there are fewer other boomers to compete with. And second, the women's lib movement. The pressure on the household was so much that women came into the workforce in order to get jobs to increased family take-home pay, which only pushed down the cost of labor more, which is why the boomers have the highest divorce rate in our history. When you have that sort of fiscal pressure every single day, of course it's going to be hard on the family. Now, my generation looks at this and like, oh no, no, we are not going to make that mistake. For us, our families and our time are at least as important as our money. We are far more likely to be single income households. Now, our relationships are more durable because of that, but wow, have we paid a price. Because we have been a small number, like 11 of us, while there's been 75 million boomers, and we've been the low men and the women on the totem pole our entire professional careers, and we have been swimming in that supersaturated labor market, and so we have seen the lowest increases in take-home pay of any American worker generation ever, until about 4 or 5 years ago. And a lot of this has been lost in the COVID mess for the data, but it's pretty clear. Because 4 or 5 years ago, the boomer retirement really started picking up speed. And even if everyone in my generation wanted to work, and I assure you we do not, there would have never been enough of us to fill all of those boomer shoes. And so over the last 4 years, we have seen record increases in take-home pay because we're the only game in town. Gen X, our time has finally arrived. Now, the rest of you know this is labor inflation, but you can suck it. All right, Zoomers. The central fact to remember about the Zoomer generation is that they are not millennials. Millennials were raised by the boomers. They were told that they were special. They didn't keep track of the score at the soccer game. They went off for Europe for 6 years after college to find themselves. Very high self-esteem, the millennials. Very good managers. Very good with people. Great collaborative, cooperative team workers. Those are not the Zoomers. The Zoomers were raised by Gen X. And they were raised with certain bedtime stories that are not the little engine that could. It's more like, yeah, there's this fairy tale about Medicare and Medicaid. Yeah, it's not going to be there for you. We're going to keep track of the score at the soccer game. We're going to write down a little book. We're going to read it to you every night. You want to survive? You just want to exist? You've got to be better. Not better than the millennials. That's easy. Better than everyone. You are on your own. You can rely on no one. And when you're 17 and a half, get the hell out of my house. They're hardworking, almost pathologically so. They're loyal. You give them a chance, you give them a job, they will follow you into hell. Virtually. They never want to actually meet you in person. They're the most antisocial generation we've ever had. They've got the highest suicide rate we've ever seen. Their dream job is to work at home in a closet that locks from the inside, coding. And if you need workers for that, they're brilliant. But they don't want to do anything where they have to meet a person face to face or see the sky. And that has some implications for the labor market. They're also the smallest generation we've ever had, which means that our current labor drought isn't going to be fixed by them. It's going to be fixed by the millennials. I talked about some of the positive traits of Gen Y. It's only fair to talk about some of the negative. Don't you agree? Okay. Narcissistic, lazy, show up for work at the beginning of the week at the crack of dawn on a Tuesday. The data supports that for half of them. The other half have always done everything that we have ever requested of them. I didn't phrase that fairly. The other half have always done everything that we have always demanded of them. They graduated from school a semester early. They didn't go off to find themselves. They went straight into the workforce, and because of it, they got screwed. They were the last ones into the room when the financial crisis hit, and so they were the first ones kicked out. Whether millennials did everything right by the negative stereotypes or everything wrong by the negative stereotypes or everything right by the positive ones, they missed out on 3 to 5 years of formative work experience in their 20s. They will never get that back. They are the least skilled worker demographic for their age block we have ever had, and they will be behind until the day they retire. And yet, all our hopes go with them because they are many. A large generation, the boomers, makes a large generation, the millennials, will make a large generation, whatever comes next. And that's how this gets fixed. 2 things going on. 3 things. Number 1, the millennials, this year, the oldest ones, turned 45. They are no longer the new kids on the block. Which means, 1, we are at the dawn of the greatest age of drama-filled reality television in human history. Because for the next 15 years, we get this rolling cadence of millennial midlife crises. 2, in 10 years, the millennials will be entering their mid-50s, and they will be in that capital-rich demographic. And the capital crunch we're in the beginning years of right now will finally start to lessen. 3, in about 20 years, the millennials' kids will have grown up, gotten trained, and entered the workforce in numbers sufficient to alleviate the labor crunch. All we have to do is wait. 2035 for the capital situation to improve, 2045 for the labor situation to improve. That's it. That's all we got to do. And while I still don't like the boomers, I have to credit them for one thing. They did one thing that their equivalent in the rest of the world did not do. They had kids. The millennial generation is an almost purely American phenomenon. That generational bulge does not exist in Italy or Germany or Spain or Poland or Russia or China or Japan or Korea or Thailand. It's just here. So we know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. With everyone else, there's a pit at the end of the tunnel. And the situation they have for labor and capital today is the best it will ever be.